Hey gang, show everybody, Platt, and today I show you how to make a yeast starter. So let's go. So today I think I got a fun little video for you. It's a home brewing technique that once you start getting out of the kits, beer thing and start kind of brewing some of your own recipes or whatever, you'll definitely want to learn, and that is making a yeast starter. What is a yeast starter and why do we need it? What a yeast starter is basically a mini beer. We'll make a mini beer that we will then pitch our yeast that we're going to use for our big beer, the real main event there. We're going to pitch the yeast in this mini beer, give it 24 to 48 hours to kind of wake up, start eating, start reproducing, and really kind of getting vibrant before we go into the main beer. Think of it as a preseason game to a certain extent before we start the real games. Why would we utilize this? Well, there's several reasons for that. First and foremost, again, we want the yeast as healthy as possible by the time we put it in our beer. When we pitch just regular dry yeast in the beer, that yeast and the yeast cells are pretty much dormant. They're dry, they're kind of in a state of suspended animation. When you pitch it in, it's going to take hours. It'll take a while for that yeast to rehydrate, reanimate, realize, hey, there's food and nutrition, let's eat, let's start reproducing, let's start doing what we do. Takes a little time. And if anything in that environment gets off, maybe you didn't chill your wort down enough, or maybe you chilled it too much, maybe the yeast pack you didn't let sit out long enough, and the yeast temperature's still cold, it goes into warm wort, it shocks itself, you could end up with yeast that produces funny flavors. We want to avoid that. So a yeast starter is a way to get the beer up and get the yeast up and running and in good shape before we attack the beer. Also, another reason to use a yeast starter is if you start making high gravity beers, bigger beers, your imperial stouts, triple IPAs, barley wine, stuff like that, you're definitely going to want to have the yeast up and ready to go, and you probably need also more yeast cells. Now, when you get further into brewing and start getting really advanced into it, there's a concept called yeast cell count, and you're going to project how many millions and billions of yeast cells you need for a certain 5-gallon batch beer or what have you. Again, advanced techniques. This is kind of a skill that you'll pick up learning that skill eventually. So again, you'll start thinking about the total amount of yeast you will need, and this is a way to adjust that. Instead of going, well, all right, I got 1 pack of yeast, I'll just throw in a 2nd pack of yeast or something like that. So another technique for that. This also is utilized. You wouldn't utilize this with just dry yeast per se. There's generally enough cell counts in a packet. This packet's for standard 5-gallon batch of blonde ale, pale ale, what have you. But again, when you start doing some specialty beers, you start using different types of yeast. If you do a liquid yeast, a smack pack, if you've harvested yeast or reusing yeast, this is from a video I did not too long ago about saving yeast from a previous batch, only 1 gallon. We're doing this for 1 gallon. But anytime you reuse yeast or stuff like that, you would want to also do a gravity starter. So that's kind of why we're doing this. Real quick before we go on, I do want to talk about, I'm sorry this is getting a little long-winded, but I think you'll appreciate it. If you look at other videos about how to make a yeast starter, you're generally going to see these right here. This is what's called Erlenmeyer flask. This is a 2,000 milliliter. This right here is a motor. It's basically a glorified fan motor that has a magnet in there that will spin. And these little magnetized tablets that you'll have in there will constantly spin and keep your mini beer whatever agitated. It also adds oxygen to the solution. Yeast, especially at the start of the process, need a lot of oxygen, again, to thrive. Advanced home brewers, people that are doing competition, stuff like that, would utilize this setup. This is probably out of our realm right right now. Now someday I may break this out and do a video on it. I just wanted to show you this, that if you case see another video like, well, he didn't bring that up, or why didn't he use that? Again, this is more of a more advanced technique. I'm kind of showing you something in the more intermediate range, but I did want to acknowledge that. So with that being said, let's make a yeast starter. So alright gang, time to make our yeast starter. Again, I'm doing this on a really small scale. I do 1 gallon batches, but you can scale up. General rule of thumb is roughly a gram of dried malt extract for every 10 milliliters of yeast starter you're trying to make. So adjust accordingly. What I have here, I've kind of rounded things a little bit just for simplicity's sake. I have 1 cup of water that I'm bringing to a boil, and I have 20 grams of dried malt extract. I'm using a light dried malt extract. You can use light, golden, what have you. I wouldn't get too crazy though. You do want to use dried malt extract. Conceptually, you could do a yeast starter with just regular table sugar or whatever. What ends up happening though is we stress the yeast because we're changing their diets. Malt extract, the sugar that the yeast is eating, is called maltose. Maltose comes from malted grain. The beer that we're going to make is going to be full of maltose. We want that yeast on a similar diet. So you wouldn't, it's not advisable, and if you're going to go through this process, not advisable to use regular table sugar. But we have our malt extract, and basically we're going to let this, we're about to come to a boil, and I'm just going to add my 20 grams of dried malt extract. And we're wanting to bring it to a boil for sanitation purposes. I do want to say that using that 1 gram to 10 milliliter ratio, you generally come out to like a 1.035, 1.040 original gravity. That's enough sugar and stuff to just kind of give it a head start. You're not needing to make a full, you know, even if I was brewing an Imperial Stout or whatever, I didn't need to make my yeast starter 1.080. So just giving you a heads up on that. So I'm going to let this come to a boil. When it comes to a boil, you do like a standard brew. I'll throw in the sink, chill it down to pitching temperature, and then we'll come back to add to our yeast. You'll want to have this sitting out at room temperature all the time, so again, to bring the temperature up. So when these two meet, you want them fairly close to temperature without shocking the yeast. So let's come back and we'll pitch our cooled beer into there. Alright gang, so our mini beer is cooled down to proper pitching temperature. I've already, like I said, I used this to harvest some yeast already from a previous batch. It's sanitized, I've kept the lead on it, so it's good. We're just going to add the beer into our yeast right here. Alright. We're going to close the lid, and we'll screw it down pretty good, and we're going to give her a swirl. We're going to mix all that yeast together. Also, too, this is going to kind of simulate that stir plate in the sense that we're shaking a lot of oxygen in there. Give her a swirl. Now I'm going to loosen that cap, and what will happen over the next 12 to 24 to 48 hours is we're going to start getting a fermentation in there. We will come back in 24 hours to see where we're at. Hopefully we've got a nice krausen, you know, plenty of bubbles and head, but just leave the lid loose enough so the CO2 can escape, because you are having a fermentation in there. You could put some tin foil over it, cover it with water if you want, but you want to make sure this can breathe. So let's come back in 24 hours and we'll come back to wrap up. Alright gang, I just want to kind of give you a side view of what we've got going on here. Not much of a head on top, but you may see along the side we've got bubbles rising. If I would, I could open the side of this jar, and if I had like a little directional microphone, you could hear the bubble, the foaming. we have an active fermentation, but I just wanted to give you this little point of view to see that our yeast starter is up and going. All right, gang, to wrap up, we've got our yeast starter completed. Like I said, you want to do this anywhere between 24 and 48 hours before your main brew is ready to go, or you've got it cooled down enough to pitch your yeast. This is just a great little tool to have in your toolbox when learning to homebrew. Again, this is not something you'd want to do with a dried yeast packet, but if you've either reclaimed some yeast from a previous batch, you've harvested some commercial yeast, or if you're working with any kind of liquid yeast, whether the liquid vials or the smack packs, a yeast starter will come in handy for sure. Basic rule of thumb is 1 gram of dried malt extract for every 10 milliliters of yeast starter you're trying to use. Well, I hope you liked this video. If you did, please subscribe down below. Also, please like the video because it lets YouTube know we're putting out good content. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, or ideas for videos, please leave them in the comment section, or you can always contact me on the Twitter page. Till next time, bottoms up.